Welcome to this episode of Abide in Me, How Jesus Models Secure Attachment with God. This series is a survey of the Gospel of Mark, looking for how Jesus models what is now called secure attachment, which is the physiological, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual experience of what is often called salvation or regeneration or being conjoined with God or enlightenment, individuation, even becoming spiritual. Through the series, we will discover the benefits of becoming securely attached with God, which is the transformation of one's life into one of joy and satisfaction. We arrive at the beginning of Mark chapter 2. Jesus has become well known, and people are looking him up all the time. He returns to his home base in the city of Capernaum, which is on the Sea of Galilee, and we're told that people are crowding around the house. They want to be healed. They want to hear what he's preaching. And pushing through the crowd comes 4 men carrying a cot with a man on it who, it turns out, is paralyzed. They can't get anywhere near Jesus, who's inside the house, and so they climb up the stairs on the outside of the house, and they break open the roof of the house, probably some boards or grasses or mud, and lower him down with ropes so that the man is lying right in front of Jesus. And the amazing thing is that Jesus says, "Oh, your sins are forgiven." And the Pharisees standing around are going, "Oh, no, wait a minute. You can't forgive sins. That's blasphemy." And Jesus says out loud, "Well, what's any easier to say your sins are forgiven than it is to tell this man to stand up and walk?" So Jesus says, in order to show you that these are connected, he says to the paralyzed man, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and go home." And the man jumps up, grabs his mat, walks out through these stunned onlookers. They were all amazed. And of course, they end up praising God. This story is about another piece of how we experience being securely attached with our God, with our Creator, with the Lord. And it's important to notice that we can argue with the Lord, right? We can argue with God about our circumstances. We can complain and challenge Him and begin to even have doubts about God's presence in our life and His role in our life. That's a normal thing so many of us have to confront. And God understands this. God understands that before we can actually get the benefit of a secure relationship with God, we have to first experience the power of God's love and wisdom in our life. Our proprium, our ego, will react to the constant reach of God offering His love and wisdom. That's normal and ordinary, being merely natural people. We first experience this as children, right? When we begin arguing with our parents and teachers. During the early stages of our life, we could not conceive of having any life if it wasn't our own, or when we are afraid of losing our value if we lose our stuff, right? Our sense of the ownership of all that we believe and all that we feel to be our own is quite important to us. And to put our life into God's hands, under His control, is far away from us. People like Richard Rohr point out that in the first half of life, that's what we're doing. We are gathering resources. We are creating a life. We are owning it. So in this story, we begin like one of those teachers of the law, the Pharisees and the scribes, by arguing with God about what's going on in our life. And then that is resolved, right? First, I want to notice that what we're dealing with here is now discoverable by science. But what we know about the human mind and the processes of its reformation and regeneration, as revealed in Holy Scriptures, is now found a description with a new language, you might say, that describes mind and spirit and physiology. The language we get from the Bible, for instance, is being complemented by modern science as we discover how the brain and physiology work and how there is this initial resistance that then, through experience, can give way to acceptance and resolution and transformation. We can actually measure the effects of God's healing power on our brains and bodies. We can now describe the state of conjunction or transformation or secure attachment, that close connection, the bond between God and ourselves. That is the heart of this story. But let's make this personal. What parts of your life do you feel are paralyzed, stuck, unable to move? What parts of your life are symbolized by that paralyzed man? What parts of your life are symbolized by the four people who care so much about that man that they brought him across the city on a stretcher and found a way to bring him to Jesus? Imagine that scene. So there's these four people, presumably men, love this paralyzed man. Maybe they're related or connected somehow, that they're going to go to this tremendous effort. And they must have believed that Jesus could heal him, right? Because that's what they were doing. They were willing to give up some good part of their day or week, right, to help this man, which means away from their work, away from their families. I'm sure impacted their daily bread in order to help this man. So we must know that there is some effort to bring this paralyzed man to Jesus. They wend their way through the streets of Capernaum. When the crowd interfered with their process, it didn't stop them. In fact, their motivation, their desire, led them to think outside the box, to be creative. Something shifted so that they were able to do something different. They were outrageous in their behavior. They climbed the outside stairs that typically would be on a house up to the flat roof. Likely there's just boards or plant materials or mud daub creating a roof. They tore it apart, damaging the roof. Then somewhere they found some ropes and they tied, I imagine, each of the corners of the mat and lowered the man down through the hole in the roof onto what must have been a very small space immediately in front of Jesus. I think it's kind of neat that the story does not include any outcry from the people waiting in line, right? Or the owner of the house. I imagine that this amazing show of commitment and this opportunity to see a miracle mollified all those observers and awakened in them now a new sense of awe and wonder about what was going on. I can even imagine the cheer coming from a crowd outside as they saw the miracle accomplished. They hadn't thought of doing this, right? This is a new thing. We're going to come back to that feature of this and when we're talking about our inner experience of this. So the spiritual meaning of the story, the personal meaning, consider for a minute what would drive us to seek healing. I'm seeing four parts of the process that leads to a discovering of a secure attachment with God. That is the bond that we're created with, but that through life, through experiences, woundedness, how life is modeled for us, what we're taught, what we're not taught, becomes some spiritual paralysis in our spiritual growth. So first, there's a recognition that we are sick and that we are suffering. That, again, is sometimes doesn't happen until the second half of life, right? Where we learn mindfully to observe what's going on and we recognize that there is this uncomfortable, there's this discomfort, there's this dysfunction in our life. So that's the first thing. Second is the acceptance of that condition in such a way that we let go of shame or self-condemnation or limiting thoughts. We recognize the paralysis, the spiritual unwellness, but it doesn't stop us. Something clicks that gets us to not just recognize that we are suffering, but that doesn't stop us. Third, there is then the ongoing regular work that we do in our lives that takes us through the normal pathways of our life. We perhaps avoid that paralysis or we suppress it, we ignore it, we don't recognize it, becomes part of our unconscious life, right? But it's still impacting us. But we keep at our efforts. We try to be creative in our life. We have a sense that we're moving towards some better life or transformation. And then fourth, finally, there is created a new relationship with the Lord that is experienced as healing. That is an experience of it, not just an understanding of it, not just a hope for it, but there is a physiological reaction that is included in this healing. And by the way, we go through this process again and again and again. This doesn't happen once in our life, but every time we come upon one of these wounded places, this paralysis, we go through this cycle to be healed. So how do we get there? Imagine you woke up this morning and perhaps like me, you often remember to thank the Lord for another chance to do your part in the process of your healing, salvation. Maybe you have a practice. It's walking or working out, meditating, journaling, in which you thank God for another opportunity to be useful, to be charitable, to be faithful. It might be that you feel encouraged to talk to someone about a negative feeling or about an idea that's disturbing you. And this has been there for days, weeks, months, that this has been stewing there. But one morning we wake up, right? And I think I could take care of that today, comes up. That doesn't happen without work. The men carrying the paralyzed man through the city. And that's the ongoing work that we do that is just the normal, everyday taking care of business. And then also having some sort of mindfulness practice or some attention to the fact that, yes, I'm suffering and I don't know, I'm just accepting that it's there. I get that it's stopping me, but it doesn't have to somehow, right? So maybe there's a loved one who's uppermost in your mind for some reason. Maybe they're ill or their life is in bad shape. Or maybe it's about yourself, more personal, individual. Maybe you realize you lied about something, or you're withholding something, or you're not doing something that would be a good thing to do. And maybe this idea has been stewing there for weeks or months about how to do this task at work, or how to resolve this relationship problem, or some detail of your own spiritual journey. And today you have the thought, oh, I can attend to that today. Scriptures are from all sorts of cultures around the world, and Swedenborg talks about it in his writings, that there are these awakening experiences, and we can wonder where these thoughts come from, where these emotions arise from. The premise of my work is that God loves us, and God is constantly flowing in with that love and the wisdom that goes along with it. And that is being realized in the spirits with us and connecting us, even though it might be unconscious. So indeed, God's love and wisdom is constantly influencing our minds more or less consciously. And modern psychology and brain science allow us to actually see the effects that these thoughts and emotions have as they can flow continuously through our minds whenever we're awake. We can see that activity in the brain. We can measure when different parts of our brains are becoming activated, and we can connect that by correlation to either happy, joyful feelings and thoughts or disturbing, paralyzing thoughts. Those thoughts and emotions have an impact on our bodies. We feel it in our stomach, right? We can measure the cortisol giving us pain in our joints from those disturbing thoughts. And we can see what happens when there's thoughts of beauty and joy. There's a response in our bodies. There's a relaxation. There is good digestion going on, right? That our body is working well. So it's this experience of having this insight, of having this moment of wakefulness that is the product of the work we've been doing that actually has a physiological reaction. And that happens to everybody. That's going on all the time in our bodies. And it is, to my mind, a manifestation of God's love flowing in all the time, giving us this opportunity to feel a connection to Him, which then is going to make a difference in how we manifest ourselves in the world. So we have many thoughts and feelings and judgments about the conditions of our life that are with us all the time, and sometimes they just stop us. We can't do anything with it. We're paralyzed. Maybe it's shame, or maybe we don't see clearly what to think. We can't figure out what to say, right? We're stopped in speaking. We don't know what is the right thing to do. It's so confusing. We may worry about the impact of our decision we have to make on others, especially loved ones. It may be that we were told as a child not to interfere in other people's lives, right? So that stops us from reaching out to be helpful. We may have been told we're not good enough, right? Or we're stupid, and we've bought into those ideas and more or less unconsciously been run by them. Those thoughts and those emotions paralyze us in the moment. We're unable to act on the insight that we just had, that we know ultimately came from God and His love and His wisdom. So what can we do? One thing we can do is to remember that all those things we've learned from childhood about God, that He's always with us, that He's urging and pressing to be received, and that He's seeking to have a secure attachment for us, that He wants to be in our hearts and minds. He wants to abide in us. If we can continue to hold that, even if we're not feeling it, that will come up in some moment of our lives when God will then feel present. Even moments when we feel paralyzed and we've taken on some paralyzing belief, or we're reacting to some false idea or fear, or feel compelled by some selfishness or materialism, those moments will show up for us as being unacceptable, that we don't want to stay there, that they're paralyzing us. So it's a regular practice that will take us on this journey through the city, carrying that paralyzed part of us. And it can be work. It can be a burden, that negative thought or experience. However, every time that we have that good thought, that insight, that positive emotion, perhaps we see it in a movie or hear it in a piece of music, or we awaken with the thought, we can step back, as it were, with our mindfulness practice and rise above that negative thought and circumstance, above that thought or emotion, and observe it. We say this is simple, right? It's hard, though, even if we say it is simple. But that's what the effort the four people took. Each step they took, some steps more difficult than others, got them closer to Jesus and the fulfillment of their belief in His healing. When they felt stopped, absolutely blocked, they looked around and they saw another way, the third way, perhaps, according to Gurdjieff, right? They climbed up, seeking higher ground, some perspective. And so, too, God encourages us to use the scriptures we know, the wisdom and love of all our ancestors, of all our experience, to be creative, to rest in the moment of acceptance as an opportunity to discover what to do and to be energized by love. That is what it is to rise above it. And this, of course, is when people report miracles happening. How do you come to see that new idea that's so helpful and compelling? Where did you get that energy to continue on? Was there some outside force pushing you or drawing you in? Or people of faith talk that way. And then modern psychology can posit from the science that when you distinguish your thoughts and emotions merely as pieces of you, you don't identify with them, you can then watch them. And then you can identify those rules of thought, the patterns of your thoughts, the patterns of your emotions, which are your normal, typical way of being. You can identify them as not you, as not the way it has to be. And so you can put down the weight of those usual thoughts, those usual ways of thinking. They just don't have the weight that they used to have. They're not as compelling anymore, at least for a moment. You might even say that you don't care. Right? I don't care about that anymore. On a deeper level, of course, you really do. But what happens is that you begin to tear apart that which would be a barrier between you and what we know is this healing power of God, of God's love and wisdom, of feeling that higher power being the source of your life and the source of your joy, the source of your well-being, not acceptance of others or worldly possessions or knowing everything or being in control of everything, right? The planks, the weeds, the mud daubing, the roof that you now see are actually barring you from transformation, from regeneration, from spiritual growth. That was comfortable. That was the way it worked, right? That was all normal, right? It worked for you, just like that roof worked. And yet it's now become, you see, a barrier. So you have these new skills. There are, as it were, ropes given to you, these abilities to let go of what is paralyzing you and put yourself into the hands of God. Amazingly, that's all there is to it, you know. At that point, Jesus just says, well, get up and walk. And he does, right? As difficult as this work is, God is then immediately present with his love and wisdom. And the paralysis then is gone because there's a new way of being that is possible to you. Of course, now you begin the work of this new life. This isn't the end. This is the beginning of some new work. You no longer participate in the complaints, the doubts, the arguments that the Pharisees were putting out there. They're there, but your perspective is different. You can rise above them. You can describe them. You can see what's going on there. This is, by some, is called a non-dual view of life. It's no longer sin versus paralysis, earth versus heaven, law versus grace, body versus mind and heart. We let go of that either or view of life because it's comparing, it is conflicting, it is merely contrasting instead of acceptance and openness to what God is offering. The experience of this secure attachment bond with God is what we call transformation, conjunction, salvation, individuation, right? It is the result of a spiritual and psychological and physiological process, as Jesus points out, that are all integrated. We overcome the inclinations that we're born with that are hereditary, the wounds that give us a view of life that and a view of ourselves that is limiting. We are able to put aside what was modeled for us that was an unhealthy way of being. And we discover that those are actually what were keeping us from connecting with our higher power, with that energy, which then gives us a confidence in ourself. We're relying on that higher power, not on whether other people like us or whether we're doing it right, or what the rules of the culture are. We are living from ourselves in this secure connection. And that is indeed the state in which we are created. We rediscover the innocence of childhood, now filled with wisdom. The Lord offers us this promise of amazement, of that aha moment, in order to get us up in the morning, to go ahead and go through the effort of the day, to continue to use that insight to find a new connection to our Creator, our higher power with God, and so recognize how God abides in us and we abide in God in this secure connection. I pray this has supported your transformative life, whatever practice you have in your life. I want to thank Solomon Keel for his music, and I want to invite you to make a contribution to this work if you wish and are able through the PayPal link. And I invite you to continue to listen to the next episode. You be well.